Well, it's great to be on today with you, Rob. Thanks for being on the Innovation in Mission video learning series.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here, John. Excited for this.
Yeah. So, your name, Dr. Rob McKenna, you lead Wild Leaders as the CEO and founder. Talk to us a little bit about what Wild Leaders is and why you're passionate about helping build trust in organizations.
Yeah. So John, I was had an early formation into the whole concept of leadership and leadership development. It was my thing. I just raised by parents who had significant leadership roles and watched them both do incredible things, but also the realities of leading were something that were common dinner table conversations for my family. And I think that had an early kind of formative effect on my life. And then I ended up, wanting to continue to study that over the years, and so to do the deepest level of study I could. And so I ended up going and doing a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, is what my PhD is in. And because I wanted to understand organizational dynamics, I had an interest in business. I had an interest in nonprofits and ministries, but I kind of had an interest across what organizational life looks like across people's lifespan. It was like this weird combination of things, and of course, this deep dive into leadership. So throughout my 30s, I was exposed to many different opportunities to be a consultant to different longitudinal studies of leadership, and longitudinal meaning across many, many years. And so one of the studies, for example, in aerospace, we followed a group of 120 leaders for 6.5 years and studied their journey.
Wow.
And as you study the journey of leaders that way, and you put them under the microscope and you apply the best leadership theory, the best psychology that's out there, best philosophical lenses on that, you realize that there is a whole story of development occurring that's not just one thing. It's not just what I'm good at and my strengths. It's not just my motivations. It includes a set of variables that are there. And so I got really intrigued, because that's what happens when you study people over the long haul, right? It gets a little more complex.
Sure, sure.
And so I started to have this vision that what if I could take that research I had been a part of and could build a set of developmental assessments that could develop what we call whole leader capacity. WILD stands for
Mm,
whole and intentional leader development. And so that it would focus in on the fundamentals, the psychological fundamentals of what's going on inside of a person developmentally, that, by the way, big corporations have always been interested in, because when they're thinking about succession planning and building their bench of leaders, they know they have to use the best things that are out there, and it can't be some popularized book or one-off moment. It has to be a system for developing that bench,
right.
those successors. So I ended up building this system of assessments. There were 10 developmental assessments at what's called the WILD Toolkit. And the reason why I tell you that is because so we were invested in developing whole leaders across every context you could imagine, and I loved that journey. We got to a point where we wanted to understand what it is we were actually doing for the organizations that we were working with. So one thing is we were developing leader capacity, but what
Right.
was fascinating, John, was that as these teams of leaders and teams in general were using our platform to then create developmental conversations related to the mission they were on together,
Right.
what was also happening that didn't occur to me in the early years was that they were starting to trust each other.
Oh, okay.
So I needed to begin to understand trust, because trust is such an easy conversation to get anyone started. If I ask any leader in our sphere of influence, any organizational person, a CEO or a president, and I say, what does trust have to do with the performance of your organization and the well-being of your people right now? That's a conversation anyone can have.
Mhm.
Um, what's been interesting, though, is that most people assume that trust is a feeling,
Right.
right? We
Seen
talk
as more
about it.
emotive for sure.
Yeah, we see it as just this
Yeah.
thing. I feel it or I don't. I have it or I don't. And
Mm,
what they don't realize, and this is this is where the danger of a psychologist getting involved in that whole process gets interesting, right? Is
uh-huh.
that trust has a chemistry,
For sure.
actually assess and measure. And it's, for some people, that feels like, really, I could measure that feeling. And it's like that song, that Boston song. It's more than a feeling. it has a chemistry, and if it has a chemistry, then we could measure it. And if we could measure it, how powerful that would be. So that's kind of the journey of Wild Leaders, and why we've created what's called the Wild Trust Index, and we're assessing trust across all these organizations. But
Now,
trust
is
is
it
such a
still,
powerful thing. Yeah, go.
yeah, is trust still one of many assessments you do and just one pillar, or has trust somehow become maybe something bigger for you guys? Kind of where's the assessment and the studying of trust in the broader scope of what you guys are doing there at Wild Leaders?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One of the things that we do initially that's so critical for development, and then I'll get straight at your question, is with whatever organization we're dealing with, when when human development gets really powerful, is when it's connected to what it is a person is trying to do.
Mm,
So there's really strong research about this, that most leader development, for example, is occurring on the job. It's as they're trying to get something done. And so whether you're talking about a leader, a team, or an organization, one of the first things that's so critical to even begin that process of what you just asked that about is understanding what we describe as their strategic moment. And it doesn't matter what kind of organization that is. And in some cases, it's very clear to them that this is our moment. It's a moment of growth, a moment where things are shrinking or there's some constraint, a moment where we've got to develop successors, a moment where our teams don't trust each other and it's affecting performance. We're putting out a new product or a new something that we're putting out there into the world, a new way to serve the people in our sphere of influence. So we identify that first. What's now become a really key part of our business model then is, after that process of discovery and understanding what it is you're trying to get done, now let's assess trust. And
mm,
so it is technically it's the 11th assessment in our what we call our Wild
okay.
Trust platform, but
Uh-huh.
it's this moment where we assess trust, like, so we get an understanding of what's going on regarding trust. Because the fascinating thing about trust is it's this incredible bridge between what we describe as the invisible and the visible. So
Mm,
it's this bridge between, we so often focus, it's much easier to focus on, let me go from a business perspective and use that language, like, this is the product we're launching. You know what I
mm,
mean? So there's a lot of emphasis on that. When all of us know that if we're launching something new, that it's going to require us to have very, very strong relationships.
for sure.
You know what I mean? But we don't talk about that as easily. It's like something we have to put onto the table. It's like that iceberg where you can see the product, you can see the new service, you can see, in a ministry context, you can see that we're launching this new initiative to
Mm,
impact the people in our sphere. What we struggle with is what we describe as the invisible, what's going on underneath the surface. And trust is this incredible bridge between the two, because trust has pieces of it that function above the surface, and a
right?
lot of pieces of it that function as more, when I say invisible, I'm like things that are within us that have to be
Sure,
shared in order for us to work together.
sure.
So then
That's
then a lot of
helpful.
times that becomes, that's where our toolkit then kicks in as the other 10 assessments that are built around the chemistry of trust. So, because now it's like, what do I do? An organizational leader says, we've assessed and I can see where we have some problems and challenges. What do I do? And we're like, well, let's map that out. Let's understand the places where you're strong, the places where you could do some work, and so on. So
That's really
it is,
cool.
yeah.
I like that. I like how you've identified trust as this bridge dynamic between the two, because I can totally see that. That really goes into our second question really, really well around innovation. Because as you know, our audience is all focused on how can they innovate within God's kingdom and within global mission, and they're looking for ways to do that, and they're really wondering about, I think how trust factors into their ability to do that. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about kind of the foundation that trust provides, allowing people to take risks and fail, and some of the ingredients that help organizations to build trust. If you could speak to that, I'd
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thank you. And goodness gracious, when even jumping on this, and I know that you have much deeper expertise specifically in innovation. So know that as I say this, I'm I love this conversation. And one of the things that it caused me to do, just preparing for this conversation with you, is going out. I love like really understanding what words mean.
Mm,
So like the fundamental definition that I use for innovation is
yeah.
so simple. It's the act of creating something new.
Mm,
Innovation is the act of creating something new. I mean, I know there's lots of different ways we could approach that definition of innovation, but when I think about it that way, it has so many. Just breaking that down and saying, what is my experience of creating something new, not by myself,
Hmm.
but together?
Right.
And the necessity for trust in the innovation process, in the act of creating something new, because new is change. Any way we wrap it, it's
For sure.
change. And what change does for human beings is it creates pressure.
Hmm.
Literally, it's like you can think about it physically when atoms hit the side of a container, right? That's
Uh-huh.
literally what creates pressure because they're running into a wall that's causing them to have to change direction. And that collision actually creates pressure. And so what we describe is organizations can't innovate if they can't change
Right.
quickly, and if people can't do that, and if they don't change well, and that requires an incredible amount of trust as almost like a lubricant in the system. Because when trust isn't there, that invisible factor between us, then we can't do anything new well. It's one of the reasons that even in our charter at Wild Leaders, one of our value statements is that we fight well,
Mm.
which people think that's weird, but I'm like, one of the reasons that's one of our value statements is because I don't. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So we every new hire we tell is like, if you come here, we are going to have to innovate. We're going to have to pivot and move very quickly. And when we do that, it's going to cause conflict, a necessary conflict of pressure in those moments that will because it's new, it's going to naturally create that, but we're going to do that well.
Hmm.
And so trust in that process, it's interesting. So our definition of trust is that trust is your belief. Let's say you and I are working together, your belief in my integrity. So will I do what you're asking me to do? Will I have your best interests in mind as I do that? It's your belief in my ability. So can I do it?
Hmm.
It's your belief in my reliability. So will I do it consistently?
Right.
It's your belief in my strength, meaning not just will I be able, but will I be able to do it better and better and do
Hmm.
it really well? And then finally, one of the most important parts about that is, will I tell you the truth if any of those pieces are lacking?
Yeah, that's
And
powerful.
and so you take that. And one last thing I'll say, John, is in terms of, and then we can get into some of those drivers that we're discovering. We're doing a lot
Yeah.
of research right now on trust, but is that you imagine like where trust occurs in an organization, any organization. And we talk about it this way. We measure it at the personal, the team, and the organizational level.
Okay.
And so imagine that. So another way to think about that is trust has conditions within us that help it, within us at the personal level, the individual level. Trust has conditions at the team level, that's between us. And trust has conditions at the organizational level. We think of that as what's around us. So there are certain conditions that you can see that are strong predictors of trust. And so if you think about it that way, then you can start to get in each one of those levels. Then we assess 10 different drivers in each of those levels that
Ah,
allow us to understand factors, because you don't get trust by talking about trust.
no, for sure. You get it by
You know what I
practicing.
mean, right? We all
Yeah.
know this is true.
Yeah.
So,
One thing I'll say is I love your definition of trust. I shared it as one of my quotes for 2024. And I shared it on social media, and a lot of people responded, just
huh.
really valued it. But specifically, I think let's start, as you're thinking about those key ingredients, start at the team level. What are some of the drivers or the dynamics that build trust at the team level? Because many of the people listening are trying to innovate on teams, right? They're trying to
Yeah.
get things done as a team. So what would some of those be?
Well, so here's what's fascinating. So the definition I just gave is really the heart. It's not all of them, but it is the heart of the things that we assess at the team level. So the team level is probably for me, and I'm not sure this is true for everybody, but it's the most interesting, because the team level is where trust is occurring in every single moment. You know what I mean? It's like it's so critical, and it's so fascinating too, because within work teams, people that are working together on mission. And again, I don't think it matters whether it's a ministry or a nonprofit or a business. People think they're so different, but at the trust level, what gets so fascinating is that we're trying to do something together.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So it's like, even in families, it's a little messier. You know what I mean? Like, we're trying to do something, but in a team, we're trying to achieve something together. So in that team level, one of the things that's important to assess, it's where that definition really comes to life, is understanding people's ability, right? Understanding what they're good at is really critical. Also, the extent to which they are telling the truth to one another is absolutely critical. So at the team level, a lot of those invisible variables start to intersect with the visible ones. But let me, if I could, for just a second, here's what's fascinating about trust. So I love it that you started at the team level, because that's where the dynamic is super interesting.
Mhm.
What's fascinating is if you back up into the personal level, what's going on, imagine what it takes to prepare for me to be ready to enter into a high performance team environment. And so this is where leader development and personal development of every person in our organizations gets really fascinating, because how can you believe in those things about me, and as we're on a team together, and know those things about me, if I don't know those things about myself? And
Mm.
so this is one of the reasons that individual development matters, and it gets super interesting. So it's like most leader development programs, for example, it's like we develop leaders in a vacuum. We put them in a classroom together, and we have them do all these different assessments and so on. Really powerful stuff. Where it gets interesting is when all that development that's occurring within me regarding my competence, my purpose and calling, my support network, my motivations, my experience base, when all of that knowledge inside of me interacts with that same knowledge inside of you,
Mm.
and we start to know each other, because it's okay, like in a friendship, to just know each other and to love on each other, and just be like, I care about you, I'm here for you. When you get into a work environment where we've got to perform together, it's a different level of knowing, right?
For
And so you're
sure. For
bringing
sure.
all those factors together into the team level. And then so at the individual level, we assess things like competence and purpose and calling, and those things I was mentioning, motivation. Then when it comes together as a team, we assess those other different parts of the definition. What's fascinating, John, is then you go to the org level.
Right.
And at the organizational level, when I said this is what's going on around us, is that there are certain organizational conditions that are really powerful conditions for trust to grow
Yeah.
and be built. So one thing it sounds so silly to say, but job clarity. Everybody knows that we've got to be accountable for our roles. We have to do what we're going to do. And how can I execute on what I'm supposed to do if I don't know what I'm supposed to do?
For sure. No,
So
absolutely.
organizations that do a better job operationally of providing
Mhm.
clarity, then people feel like, okay, I know my lane. I know where I cross into other people's lanes, and we'll be more honest with each other. And so it's just, I find it all fascinating.
What are some other organizational characteristics that engender trust? Like, so think about building a culture of innovation, right?
Yeah.
In a culture of innovation, you have an environment, an ecosystem where I feel that I can go out on a limb and try something new. So talk to me about what an organization has to be performing like. So one thing you described, which I thought was helpful, was the clarity, right? Clarity around roles, clarity around mission. I had a leader recently tell me clarity is caring, right? Is the idea
Right.
that the
Right.
clearer you are, the more you show you care because you care enough to actually explain it in a way that everyone can understand it so that they can then act based on that understanding. So, what
Yeah.
are some other characteristics beyond clarity that, if an organization will put them in place, they're kind of setting themselves up to have a culture of innovation?
Yeah. So good. So one of them that you just mentioned, is what we describe as emotional maturity of the leaders.
Okay.
And it's funny to think of that as a condition, but the thing about that is, and so literally the way emotional maturity is defined is the extent to which leaders are both clear and caring.
Mm,
And
okay.
and what people don't realize is a lot of times in culture, we've had a little bit of a sort of an overemphasis, especially in business culture right now, toward empathy
Right.
and compassion. Very, very important. Don't hear me dismissing that for a moment, but it's not enough.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? So it's not
Well, in what
enough.
way? In what way?
So if we over pivot toward just caring for people, the problem with that is that we will, if that's all we do, and we don't provide clarity, and clarity meaning like clear direction, clear lines and boundaries around what it is that we're going to do, clear convictions about what's going to be important that some people might not like.
Mhm.
And so it required, if you over pivot toward caring for people,
Mhm.
what happens in a lot of organizations is that we end up sort of becoming more peace-mongering organizations. And the problem with that, there's an assessment in our toolkit called the Leading Under Pressure Inventory that assesses emotional maturity, self-differentiation, but it's one of the most powerful predictors of trust.
Mm.
And so we look for those leaders, provide those kinds of leaders, set the entire conditions for a culture where people are going to speak truth to one another. So
Okay.
they're going to, and the problem in high caring organizations where there's a little bit of an emphasis on peacekeeping over truth speaking is that you cannot keep everyone happy without lying to somebody.
Wow. Huh.
And so
That's an
and this, I think
interesting
this is,
statement.
yeah, and I think you and I have talked a little bit about this. I think in a ministry context, and this is an overgeneralization, but sometimes there's an over pivot toward being grace-filled communities
Mhm.
and organizations, and at the expense of being truth-speaking communities. And the challenge is that the necessary complexity of leading is that it requires both.
For sure.
There's a paradox in that, right? That anybody who's
Absolutely.
been in a leadership role gets like, yeah, I want to care for my people. I do care for my people. And I also some of them need to work on being more direct and some of them need to work on something else. Some of them need to work on the caring part for
Sure.
sure.
Now,
But
let's think
it's
about
one condition. Yeah.
let's think about this for a minute then. So one of the big things about innovation is that there's a lot of ambiguity, right? When you're going out to explore a new area, you don't know where you're going to head or where it's going to take you. So, my wife Mindy and I always joke about the show 24. I don't know if you remember that show, the 24-hour show. In that show, the main actor is always saying, "Just trust me," right? And then he jumps off buildings or does whatever he does, right? And I think about that when I think about ministry innovators. We are saying to our execs, the executive teams, the boards, trust us. We're on an innovation journey. We'll get you there. But there's a lot of unknowns in that. And nonprofits don't really do well with a lot of unknowns.
Yes.
So what are some of the dynamics around building the trust that will say, I'm going to give you room to deal with that ambiguity? Any thoughts there?
Well, here's where the powerful thing kicks in, and I think what you just described is true of businesses as well, of
Sure.
for profits. It's like they don't deal well with that lack of those things as well. And I think one of the pieces of that is so critical is like you were describing, um, that necessity for clarity is so key in understanding where we are. And one of the things that people sometimes struggle with is and I think sometimes I'm gonna overgeneralize, but in the context of nonprofits, is the concept of measurement. I would say that it's sometimes in business context, in for-profit context, there's a little bit more comfort with measurement and assessment. The challenge is that it's something that can be assessed. And so we hear that all the time, right? You go back to that 24 reference, just trust me. Again, people don't trust you because you say it. They trust you, and when the conditions for trust are present and there's work being done on things that seem so different from trust but are absolutely key to building it. And I tell
Mm,
you that because one of the most powerful things that we have seen as people have used our Wild Trust Index, and it is such a simple tool, John, that assesses these key variables, these conditions or these drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational level. And then what we do, imagine this just a second. Um, we place them in what's called our Wild Trust quadrant. So they get a picture of where they are. Now imagine an organization that is high on team trust
mhm,
and also high on organizational trust. So the team members within teams within that organization trust each other, and their organizational they trust in the mission, what the organization is doing to create those conditions. They have clear jobs, people are developing, their leaders are emotionally mature, and so on. We call that a stronghold of trust. High
mhm,
team, high org. Imagine an organization that has high organizational trust, and you could assess that. So they believe, we call that the shell of trust, but low team trust. So it's like it's like an egg, right? It's got a solid outside, but it's kind of messy in the middle. And then some organizations profile on the high team, low org. So it's like we call that islands of trust. So there's trust within working teams, but they don't necessarily trust what's going on at the organizational level. Now, of course, think about the low category, and we call that the jungle of trust. And what's been fascinating, John, is that nearly half, it's like 49% of the organizations in our study that we're going to publish in mid-March are in the jungle. Half
Really?
of the individuals, and it does not matter what industry they are in. And
Uh-huh.
so there's a lot of work to be done. But I tell you that because what's been so powerful for me when I watch people see that debrief of that index is this realization, oh my goodness, this is something I could measure. And I've heard so many organizational leaders whose organizations are in the jungle say to us, like when we ask them, so how is this landing on you? What are you thinking right now? And they'll say, I feel hopeful. And one of the reasons I think they feel hopeful is because they see a pathway through measurement. And I don't mean like robotic measurement, because it has to be, I always describe like measurement that breathes. So it has to have their story in it, right? But without that, some of those metrics, they didn't realize, like, I can't just say to people, I trust me. I could put the conditions in place and I could pull certain levers based on what it is that's going on in our specific organization to move the dial and to feel that sense of people thriving in their organization.
Well, let's pivot right over to the research, because you kind of introed it there, and one of the things I'm really excited about, we're going to be sharing the report, with the Innovation and Mission audience, and letting them know about it. But talk to us a little bit about the research, what you're testing, or what you're going to be kind of what you were looking to do with it, what you're looking to kind of um, help people wrestle with as they get to look at those results.
Yeah, so we're publishing what's called the State of Trust report, and we've been in this data collection monster stream for the last few months, and so it's been an amazing process of now close to 50 organizations have taken the trust index this year, and so we're going to be publishing those findings coming up. I will tell you that some of the things that surprised me this year were what I just told you, is that nearly half of the people across all the organizations in that sample, half of them are in the jungle. And when I saw that, it's interesting to look at a graph like that where you're seeing these data points. And when I look at data points like that, I've always been like this. When I see, I've been a researcher for years. I see the humanity. I see each of these dots as a person, and I start thinking about the experience of what it means to be there, and what it means to, because you and I have been there. I'm assuming you have as well, where I didn't trust my team members. I wasn't sure I trusted the organization's mission or the leaders, and I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying we've all been in those moments where that's occurred.
Sure.
And so I think that was a significant moment of understanding for me. The other thing, so we're publishing this study. We also wanted to understand, like, where are most organizations high?
Hmm.
Where are they doing better? And also, what are the drivers of trust at those three levels, at the personal, team, and organizational level? So we're literally in the middle of all those analyses right now. And there is some really fascinating stuff in there. John, it is really fascinating. That concept of emotional maturity I just described to you,
Hmm.
it's also called self-differentiation, is a critical driver at all three levels. And so it's the extent to which I am able to be clear and caring, which we're digging deep into that. But it's just that's we'll be publishing that, and all of your listeners will be able to access that report. And there's some great stuff in there.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, because I think you're gonna uncover. I love how you focus on the individual, the team, and the org, and you're going to be able to, I think what that report will help us with a little bit is getting a sense for what the person can do, because there's certain things an individual can do to create an environment that will build trust. What you can do on your team, like your innovation team, right? Because there's a lot of the organizations that I work with, they'll have teams of 2 or 3 or 4 people that are working on innovation projects, and then
Yeah.
what they can do as that innovation team engages with the broader organization to create an environment where there is trust in trying new things. And so they get all three levels,
Yeah.
I think what you guys are working on is going to be really insightful and hopefully really helpful.
Yeah. That is my hope. That is my hope. Because you imagine when you were just describing that team process, is that we think about, we don't think about this every day, but we know is once we start to work together that if I don't have certain developmental things occurring within me where I feel off track and like I'm not sure what my purpose is right now, if I feel a sense that I'm not sure what I'm actually good at, or my job is feels like I'm not doing the things I'm ever good at, you know what I mean? I'm not getting a chance to do those things. If I don't feel like I have social support around me. So I haven't built. So one of the assessments we use is what's called the strategic support assessment, and so it helps people to build that network of support for the mission that they are on. And so what we know psychologically occurs if you reduce all these 10 factors at the personal level. So just picture that all these things are decreasing in me or at a lower moment. Then I enter into a conversation where you and I are having to innovate together,
Mm,
and all of this, I don't know if this may be oversimplified word, but all this lack of agency and insecurity in me is there.
mm,
And now it's interacting with whatever's going on in your developmental story as we're trying to produce that new program.
wow.
What happens? We all know what happens, right? It
Yeah.
just doesn't go well, as opposed to
Right.
two people who are in a rich developmental learning process together. You know what I mean? Where I'm doing this work individually and then I'm coming together and I'm sharing that with you so that when we enter into that innovation moment, which is coming every day, right? In some ways, maybe
Right.
not always, but we're so much better together. We aren't sabotaging each other out of insecurity. We aren't, hiding back from certain truths that need to be spoken. We're working together and we are pushing forward creatively and with inspiration.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's really encouraging. That's insightful because I think we miss the dynamic between the personal, the team, and the org so many times. And so, hey,
Yeah.
I'm really excited, Rob, to be able to read your number one, read the research. I haven't gotten to see it yet because it's not out, but read it and then really, challenge our the team of innovators out there around the world to engage with it. So, thanks so much for taking a little time to hang out and spend together. I really appreciate it.
Of course, John. I so appreciate it too.
Yeah, thank you for your work and thanks for investing in helping leaders to build trust. It's probably one of the most important things we can do, and so your work
Yeah.
is really important. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and if anyone out there, John, who's listening, um, if we can't help, we'll find someone who can. So if they send an email to contact@wildleaders.org, someone on our team will try to find you resources that could help you, or just to connect you to how to take the trust index or to receive the study. So yeah,
Wonderful, wonderful.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, John.